All right, and we're live with Cliff Wilson. Now, Cliff is one of the coaches with the most impressive track records as a natural bodybuilding coach, although you do coach some enhanced athletes as well. And you've been doing so for close to 14 years now, founded Team Wilson in 2010. And you have just a mind-blowing track record. You had over 150 people turn pro, at least last time I checked in September. 17 world champions in all divisions and a little over 100 pro titles. You probably lost count there.
I don't. Yeah, I don't. I haven't written down somewhere, but I haven't looked at it since this year. But yeah, sometimes I kind of laugh because it's like I remember telling my wife when I first started coaching, I'm like, who knows, maybe I'll be able to coach a pro or two one day, and that was kind of like what I was aiming for, to be honest with you.
Well, you did manage to get there.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say up front for everyone watching or listening that my usual microphone setup broke. So I'm using my what's it called? iPhone headphones, so earpods. But hopefully I can clean up the sound afterwards.
Right.
All right, so to make this as valuable as possible, I have a few questions written up here, but I assume we're also just going to flow. We proceed here. So also up front, Cliff is my coach. I hired him almost 5 months ago now because I wanted to get in shape for my 50th birthday in June. And I'm just a horrible coach for myself. I tend to do stupid stuff that I would never do with a client. And not just does Cliff have an impressive track record, I also like the guy. We've chatted a little before. I don't agree with everything in his philosophy, and that's probably one of the main reasons I chose him, because I don't want someone who just blows smoke up my ass. I actually want someone who can challenge me a little, and it's been just very impressive learning experience. And I mean, my physique changes has been quite dramatic, I would say myself. So thank you for being in my corner. I think I keep saying that every week, but it bears repeating. And I want to start off with a question because I liked what you said since I immediately started challenging the stuff you sent me and some things you had said, training volume, how you set up training in general. And it kind of struck me because you said that you also started following the science, but eventually you got tired of always having the smaller guys on stage and then just started doing your own thing. So expand a little on that, because that's really interesting.
Yeah, no, and first off, I appreciate you having me on here, and I appreciate you letting me work with you. To be honest with you, when someone such as yourself that is so educated and accomplished in your own right reaches out to me, it's honestly one of the better compliments I could get. So I really appreciate it, and I've been really happy with what we've been able to do. But no, you're right. When it comes to like training philosophy, I think over the years I've gotten to be known more as a nutrition guy than a training guy, because I speak about it more readily, nutrition more readily than I do training, because sometimes I feel that training variables come down to such an individual level that it can be hard to even speak about it with any sort of regularity or certainty. But it doesn't diminish the fact that I am extremely passionate about training. And so, when I first got into coaching, I did sort of look to the research for my answers. The reason being that when I went into the gym, one, I've always been a reader, so it's like, of course, I'm going to read about something before I even go in there and do it. But I also found that I'm not the biggest guy in the world myself. Genetically speaking, I'm not someone that builds muscle very easily. And so when I didn't respond well with like what the bodybuilding magazines were recommending, I kind of went to go the more scientific route through research and what the research was recommending. And just given my genetic, I didn't grow particularly well either way, but I definitely liked the idea that something had been proven before I was going to implement it. And so that's kind of the route that I went with my coaching in the early going. Um, the problem was, as you said, I felt like I was always having the smaller, leaner guys on stage, never the bigger guys. And you can kind of wave that correlation off a few times. Do you know what I mean? Even the first few years, 3 years of my coaching, correlation, genetics. My clients don't have the genetics to get that big. Correlation isn't causation, blah, blah, blah. And, but then after so many years, you're like, then what actually starts to be the biggest rude awakening in the early going of my coaching was when clients would prep with me and get really lean, and then they would go off and do their own training in the off season. And then they'd seem to come back significantly larger than when they did periods of growing with me. That's a big hit to your ego right there, right? You're like, okay,
Right. Yeah.
what have we been doing? And so, so I guess the thought that I had was I can wave off correlation isn't causation with me having not having the larger competitors on stage. But then you can also do it on the other side, right? The biggest guys training this way, correlation isn't causation. So you can kind of wave it off on both sides. So I kind of just made up my mind. I was like, I need to get in there and try some things and maybe look at different ways of interpreting the research. And you and I have had some discussions on that as well. It's like, what are some different ways I can read this research and maybe interpret it a little bit differently? Um, Kind of what I did was I would go into the research and say, how can I interpret this research to show what some of the more bro tactics, um, maybe why are they working? And how could that be validated by the research? And so kind of it's been a decades long process of doing that. It's not like I had this one aha moment and now I'm here. It's been a decades long process of finding what aspects of more bro training work and what aspects of the more proven scientific methods work. And I've kind of gotten to this point where I'm meeting in the middle with some aspects. Some things I do that are much more scientifically driven by the research, and some things are kind of just, in the gym tested, been used for a lot of years type stuff. And so here we are.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic, and I'm as evidence based as they come. I mean, I spend a lot of time digging through the research, but most of all, I've been coaching for almost 3 decades now, so I tend to see certain trends, and I've gone through the same process as you. Sometimes you just have to evaluate the person in front of you, and sort of try out things, and if something works better, then you just do more of that, and if something doesn't work, then you stop doing that. And of course, research is something that looks at average responses. They have one group doing this protocol, the other group doing another protocol, and they follow them for 8 to 12 weeks usually. And so the reason why I'm also interested in listening to the in the trenches guys, because in the hierarchy of evidence, you have the randomized controlled trials at the very top, and at the very bottom you have guys like us.
Yeah.
Like we're basically not worth anything in terms of being evidence, a source of evidence. But again, we are the guys working with people over not only years, but sometimes decades. I mean, I've had a guy now, he just returned for another 6 months. And I think it's almost 10 years since the first time I worked with him. So I mean, you get to see people in real life that have, daily challenges. Some of them, I mean, you obviously have a lot more competitors. So that certainly biases you towards the more ambitious driven And again, like you said, I don't believe it's necessarily genes. It's probably just, the mental toughness and being goal oriented, but also process oriented. And I guess you can tell me, do you see like certain commonalities between clients approached me that wanted to get on stage, and sometimes they wouldn't, they expected to be in shape in 12 weeks, and in reality, it was like double that. And some of
Yeah,
them kind of didn't, tolerate the daily grind that contest prep involves. But do you tend to see like a difference between those that are successful and get on stage and those who don't?
definitely, definitely. And actually, going back to what you said about assessing the individual in front of you is that's such a wise statement too, because sometimes when I get people, they'll tell me like, they'll say, well, training volume, this is off of what, this study shows. One thing I'll say is like, a lot of times these training studies, you go into the data tables, okay, they can say like the recommendation is X amount of volume per week, but then you go into the data tables and yeah, there's usually a decent grouping in here, but there's a lot of speckles over in the
Yeah,
outlier department, right? It's like
just
this
an
guy,
incredible
yeah,
variance. Yeah.
yeah. And so sometimes I'll even send a picture of like a data table and I'll be like, okay, which data are you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um,
Which one of these are you?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but and you mentioned also about us being like at the bottom of the evidence-based totem pole, and it is true. And then it gets hard to know who, in the anecdotal evidence department can, be the best at deciphering what is valid anecdotal evidence. My dad isn't in the fitness sphere at all, but he's a PhD scientist in plant pathology. And one thing that always kind of, um, so sometimes growing up, maybe I kind of got this inclination from him growing up, but sometimes he would do things out in the field. And I would hear him explain like why he would do it. And some of it was kind of like, well, I've just seen this a lot over the years. And, he kind of told me once, he said, guys in the field, like in him, he's literally in the field because of plant pathology.
Yeah, literally
But he would
speaking
say,
in the field.
yeah, he would say, sometimes like guys in the field have to do things that hasn't really been shown to be effective yet in the research, and then especially not yet in the textbooks. And he said, by the time something reaches the textbook, somebody in the field's already been doing it 15 years. You know what I mean?
Yes, exactly.
And
Wow, that's
and so
just perfectly stated.
yeah, and so I don't know. Hearing that, I would say hearing that statement definitely made me a little more brave to try some things. Like hey, it's kind of like a license to like try some things, see what works. Um, but no, going back to the commonalities you see with people that get on stage. Um, I think, I've had this discussion with a lot of clients, particularly first-time competitors, is that there are a lot of auxiliary skills that come along with being a bodybuilder. A lot of people think I want to be a bodybuilder and I'll just eat this food and do this training and then I will be a bodybuilder, right? But there are so many auxiliary skills that people don't even realize are required to step on stage. Um, it's not eat this food and do this training. There are things like, can you manage fatigue? Because we all get so tired in a contest prep. Um, can you manage a schedule properly? Being able to stick with some sort of meal schedule. Can you tolerate hunger? Um, can you deal with the mental ups and downs? Like there are a lot of skills like being able to manage confidence, because particularly for your first show, there's so many aspects to confidence. Like you don't know what you're going to look like by the end of the diet, which is already like a confidence driven issue. And then even if you knew exactly what you were going to look like, you don't even know where you're going to place with that look. So it's like there's two aspects of, can you withstand this blow to your confidence? Um, then there's aspects of, like you said, it takes twice as long to get on stage as most people think. So then are you patient enough? Are you resilient enough to be told that it's going to take you twice as long? There's just so many of these like mental components that a lot of people don't realize they even need in order to step on stage. And so, yeah, I think that some of the commonalities I see, one thing I usually break it down to in terms of the mental factors that I like to see Obviously, like one of the most basic, you want to see somebody that's motivated, somebody that's self-motivated. They don't constantly need to be told like, "Come on, get up, you can do this."
Yeah,
Somebody that has some
intrinsically.
sort, yeah, somebody that has some sort of self-motivation, intrinsic motivation. I want to see confidence. Now, this doesn't mean somebody that's like, oh, I'm going to win this bodybuilding show. Of course, I'm going to win. I want to see confidence in terms of they know they can, whatever the process looks like, they can tolerate it. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah,
I want to see that confidence. Hey, whatever this process requires, I'll be able to handle it. Like that kind of confidence. Um, I want to see someone that's resilient because if you're not resilient, some people have such a lack of resilience where it manifests weakly. The scale doesn't go down and
mm,
you're just completely thrown off by that scale not dropping that week. That shows a real lack of resilience. I want somebody that's going to be able to handle the ups and downs. Sometimes weeks aren't going to go well. Sometimes you might tweak your hamstring, strain your hamstring, or pull a muscle. Can you stay steady through that whole process?
yeah.
That resilience.
Work around it.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, self-discipline, it's kind of adjacent to motivation, but that's the next one. I want to see self-disciplined athletes. Somebody that I usually put self-discipline in terms of not just motivation, but knowing their own value systems in terms of what they require in order to be disciplined. Um, Oftentimes I see athletes struggle with self-discipline because they tell themselves, okay, I'm going to buckle down and I'm going to stick with my diet. But then they kind of like they shuffle off all their other life needs. They ignore their wife, they ignore their kids, they start slacking at their job, and then these other things start to compound, and then it's like they don't. Then you can't focus on your diet when everything else around your life is just falling apart. You know what I mean? So
Mm,
disciplined enough to keep everything in order. And then the last mental characteristic I like to see is I like to see individuals that are titrating. um, Titration is a phrase that's commonly used in like medicine and chemistry, where you continually measure and adjust the balance of. But with competitors, I want to see a titrating individual, somebody that continually measures themselves and adjusts themselves, and can also measure their path being taken and adjust that path. So like sometimes in bodybuilding you say, well, I'm going to stick with a plan that I may work with an individual and I would say I would like to keep their carbs as high as possible. I want a lower fat, higher carbohydrate approach. Maybe that's what I believe is going to be the best route for them. But then
mm,
sometimes you start getting into the mix of the diet and you're like, this is not the right approach for this person. I think a more moderate carbohydrate, maybe a little bit higher fat approach. You need somebody that can be like, okay, I'll make that adjustment. Let's
mm,
just adjust. You can be flexible in that approach, and you can measure what is happening and adjust the approach and adjust yourself. And even that goes into something like the ability to take a rest, because sometimes you get people where their entire identity is built on I'm the hardest worker in the room, right? I'm going to be the hardest worker. But the problem is, if you consider yourself the hardest worker, those people don't want to ever take a deload. They don't ever want
yeah.
to take days off. And so I need somebody that can say, I'm going to do whatever it takes to be my best. If that means being the hardest worker, if that means taking a rest when I need it, whatever it takes, I'm going to do it. So those are the main characteristics that I see that lead to like success in the bodybuilding sphere, because those will allow you to do what you need to do in terms of the diet and training. Does that make sense?
Mm. Yeah, makes a lot of sense for sure. And there's obviously some of that is built into certain people, but some of that you kind of need to ring out as a coach, remind them of, you decided to do this. I've had my weeks. We both know that where it was kind of rough. Both energy wise and moods and hunger and all that stuff. But it's about you kind of always manage to just remind me of, well, it was your choice, and you know let's just work towards the goal here. And it just kind of made me snap right back. And again, I intuitively already know this and tell my clients this, but for myself, it's a lot harder.
It's hard to coach yourself. It's hard to
Yeah,
remain objective. It's so
yeah,
hard. And
definitely.
yeah, and I think that that's one of the issues that that's one of the things that I think is valuable in terms of the coaching process, because it's like everything we feel feels so heavy. Do you know what I mean? The burden
Mm.
of all of our sensations that we're feeling is solely on the individual. And I think sometimes it's helpful to take like that step back and remind yourself, like, whatever I'm feeling is only temporary. This will pass. This is gonna, there's and it makes sense, I guess I would say, especially from the hunger and fatigue standpoint. It makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, because sometimes you get caught up in the feeling, the sensation of hunger, and it's like,
Mm.
what does that feel like? It's hard to describe it, but it's kind of like, if you kind of dig down to the root of it, or it almost feels dangerous. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like hunger, and it's like it's pings some sort of evolutionary alarm bell in your head. This is dangerous. And I
mm.
think because for the entirety of human history, hunger was dangerous. If you are
Yeah,
hungry, you're in danger. You're going to starve. And so I think
right.
sometimes it helps to like pull ourselves back to our what we know is that, hey, we live in modern times. The sensation is not dangerous. I have another meal coming in 3 hours. We can take a breath.
Yeah,
And it's like, sometimes that little perspective shift can kind of just be like, hey, yeah, there's no problem, right?
yeah. That's a very good point. Um, but I kind of want to bring it back to, because this kind of relates to how hard the process has been, because I came from a background of doing 3 to 4 workouts per week, quite low to moderate volumes, 1 to 2 sets per exercise. And with your program, it was more of a, well, not a bro split, but close to it. I have a chest and triceps day, I have a back day, I have a leg day, arm day, which I haven't done in probably two decades. So that was both interesting and very very new to me. And then also some additional work in that high rep day. And you also had like a scale in volume from week to week. So you kind of repeat low, medium, high volume kind of thing, just to give an overarching perspective here on the structure. And I tried to kind of, because it was brutal once I started, and it was like 10 to 15, 16 sets per muscle group. And I've been all the way down to 2, maybe 4 sets, 5 sets even. And I did I discovered, wow, this is really hard. Can I even survive this? And I probably hadn't read the fine print and understood the way that you set this up, because I tended to go to failure or very close to it on every set. Whereas your approach was more, well, it's 1 to 4 RIR, reps in reserve. And then you marked out some exercises. Okay, you're going to go to failure on the last set of this one. And so it kind of dawned on me along the way that we have kind of the high volume over here and we have the low volume, like Dorian Yates over here and Ronnie Coleman over here. Yeah, to kind of put it in on the extreme ends of the spectrum here. But Dorian did like 2 to 3 even warm-up sets and one hard set to absolute failure, and Ronnie Coleman tended to pyramid. And so I kind of see that the disconnect. I discussed this with Paul Carter on last week's podcast as well. The disconnect is that if you haven't standardized for proximity to failure, it might not be that far off. And I could very well defend training with your type of volume approach from the perspective of not going balls to wall on every single set, and also building up the work capacity and volume tolerance. So now I'm doing double and even triple the volume that I was used to doing, and of course it was rough on the lower calorie uh,
Yeah.
phase of the diet, but it's amazing what you can adapt to and respond to. So it's kind of, once you take the proximity to failure into account, and that I mean, you're not going balls to the wall on every set every week, then for sure I can understand that this is working quite well. And also with the lower frequency, so you don't have to work chest directly again for another week. So
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
yeah,
and I keep a lot of these variables going, and you're right, and even with like Dorian Yates, he would do those like completely just max out failure sets, but I would I would even venture to say even Dorian Yates's warm-up sets were probably more intense than most people
right,
realize. Like
exactly.
those are debatable working sets, I would say, with his warm-up sets. Um, and so I think like you said, we get down to semantics of what is classified as a working set. But I would even say over the last 7 years for myself, I've kind of developed more of an appreciation for sub failure sets. Um, because so then we get into real nuance. Like this is such a nuanced training that only guys like us could probably appreciate. It's like what proximity to failure is enough to stimulate growth?
Hmm.
Like how close do we come? I do agree, some of the research shows that you're probably going to be able to stay a little farther away from failure and still grow with heavier loads than with the higher reps. So if I'm 4 reps away from failure on a set of 30, that's probably not as effective as 4 reps within failure on a set of, you know, 8 or something along those
Completely
lines.
agree. Yeah. Hmm.
Um, but I actually think there's still value in those high rep sets in terms of I'm sometimes building that neural coordination, but that's another. We'll go with that. But no, in terms of proximity to failure, one thing I also like to do, with you, you're very experienced. So one thing that I kind of like to do is let you get a little more leeway to decide how close should you come to failure today.
Hmm.
But I kind of like to build that. I do a lot of I pride myself at least on trying to do a lot of building of understanding with my athletes, even with first time competitors. So like with first time competitors, I'll be a little more strict. I want you to go failure here. I want you to, not go failure here. I want exactly this many reps in reserve because, newer trainees, sometimes they don't know what they're thinking and what they're feeling. But my goal is to eventually give them a little bit more room to run. I kind of borrowed this from coaches in other sports because you notice basketball, football, American football, they don't. A lot of these college coaches that do well in college, they tend to struggle when they go to the professional level. And I think one of the reasons is often that a lot of these college coaches, they micromanage these college kids, right?
Hmm.
I need you to run this play exactly this way. Don't deviate. When you get to the professional level, you're dealing with educated athletes that know their abilities and know how to make in-game adjustments. And coaches try to micromanage them, right? And they don't
Hmm.
understand that the athletes even have some knowledge of what their abilities are that sometimes the coach doesn't have. So it needs to be a little more of a collaborative effort. So a lot of times when I'm coaching, the more advanced a person is in terms of their knowledge of themselves and their own capabilities, I kind of give more of the variables over to them and say, hey, when you're in the gym, decide how you feel that day, decide how close you should come to failure. And it's not always like a black and white because sometimes I'll have them send me videos. This is something that it's an evolving process. Sometimes I'll be like, send me a video. Let's see how close you're coming to failure on these sets. And then we can kind of put our heads together. Do we think that was close enough to failure to stimulate growth? And we can kind of like have an ongoing discussion about towing that line between what is enough and what is too much. And it's kind of this evolving process. So that's where we get into those data tables again, right? It's like
Yeah, yeah.
me and the athlete are collectively trying to find out where do they fall on this data table. Which data point are they? Are they somebody that can handle an insane amount of training volume, more moderate levels, low levels? And we kind of just going back to titration, we titrate it also because that may ebb and flow depending on what they have going on in their life. If they have if they're sleeping a lot and getting well rested and life is going well, they can probably handle more training volume. If they're having troubles at home, troubles at work, not sleeping, then we probably need to lower it down. And that's also where there's value in me handing that over to them a little bit in terms of intensity, and even cutting a few sets off here and there. It's like, hey, you can change this. This is your call, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. And I mean, it also ties in with, I I created coaching education a couple of years ago, and I'm going to start teaching that again yeah, very soon. And one of the modules is on the psychological development model. And that speaks to exactly what you said there, that some of the younger clients that we get, they need more direction. They need more rules, and they need to be told what to do. Whereas someone older and more experienced, more reflected, tend to need more of a companionship, like someone that, you know, uh, they just cooperate with and spar with and have like a running dialogue with. So um, they don't want to be told what to do, and the younger ones don't want to have you ask their friend. They need to be told what to do. So that's
I,
actually speaks right in line with the psychological theory as well.
yeah, yeah. And I apologize. I cannot remember the study off the top of my head, but I remember reading a study some time ago, a couple of years ago, something along the lines of they asked trainees to they were using an RPE scale, and they had trainees perform a set, and they asked them to perform an RPE of 9 or something like that, which
Mhm.
is close to failure, and they had the trainees do that, and they said, okay, this was an RPE of 9, and then they had them come back and um, perform a set to failure with that same weight. So assess like how close were they, how accurate were they, and I want to say most of the trainees got like 7 more reps or something like that. And
Exactly. Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah,
this was with new trainees. So the thing is,
yeah.
most of these new trainees, they don't know. You know what else I think is actually another tool that I find extremely helpful. There've been so many iterations of we're going into bodybuilding history. I hope the young people don't check out on us here, but like Arthur Jones and Mike Menser, high intensity training style, and then it goes to Dorian Yates, and then I don't know if you remember like Skip LaCour doing his Max OT training.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and sometimes I find it's helpful with newer trainees to give them these training programs. Like, I still prescribe Max OT training
Hmm.
to some of my younger athletes, newer athletes, or Max OT and some more Mike Menser hit style training, because you can't accurately gauge reps in reserve or RPE skills until you know what failure looks like and know it well.
Right.
Like you can't know what your capabilities are until you push those limits. And so sometimes I'll
Exactly.
give people max OT training. I'm like, you need to learn what failure is. Failure is. We're going to do a 12 weeks of max OT so you get it. And so
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
um,
yeah.
I think there's a lot of
That's
value
so
in that.
true. I mean, that's the way I program in the last program, which is my online program, where I have everyone just do a few weeks of one set to failure, so they can recalibrate what that actually entails. And for some, they're off by 5 or more reps, and some actually are so used to training to failure that that tends to break them. So we need to scale it back and add more volume instead. So that's just completely accurate in my experience as well.
Yeah, and same thing. It's like even sometimes with all of these variables. I think with newer trainees, and sometimes even advanced trainees, because I even do this myself. It's good to sometimes get back to, like you said. Sometimes it is good to do more sets to failure, lower the volume down, do more sets to failure, and like recalibrate. What does failure feel like again? What is
Yeah,
it like to go? And sometimes it's not even like what does failure feel like, because most training programs we all go to failure, but it doesn't mean we're always going to failure on this exercise or that exercise. And so it's like, yeah, I may take dumbbell bench press to failure often in my program, but maybe I'm not taking pec deck to failure very often.
right.
So it's
Yeah,
like, maybe I don't know what I can actually do on that exercise. So it's like learning your capabilities, just push the limits every once in a while and let's see what we can do. If you overtrain for a little bit, all right, let's take 5 days off or something like that, and then you're right back at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it's not the end of the world if you overtrain a little bit. You can back off a little bit and then jump right back into a program after you've calibrated it.
So where do you see? Because I know you've been working with some of these really top bodybuilders for a few years. Do you see that they keep responding to the same volume, or do you need to add more volume? And how do you actually ensure that someone keeps building muscle, becoming better and better, and improving from year to year?
So that is a good question. Um, a couple of things I feel like I've noticed. Um, this is just purely my anecdotal evidence here, and you know, time will tell if I'm right, I guess. But but I guess a few things I've noticed is that I think there's a certain flow to most people's careers in terms of what is focused on in the early going. And so when I say flow, I think the success of a competitor will depend on can they accept this flow. Um, so the first several years of training, let's say one to, first 5, maybe 7 years of training, it's really progressive overload focused, right? Put 5 pounds on the bar, increase, put 5 pounds on the bar, put 5 pounds on the bar, um, which is comfortable for a lot of people. It's real black and white. You got stronger that week or you didn't. But let's be honest, after 7 years, maybe 8, depending on the person, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, you start to run out of room to add weight on the bar. Because how many, somebody that's been training 9 years, how often are you adding weight to a curl? You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
Like, um, adding 5 pounds to a curl in a year, the new trainees are going to hate to hear this, but adding 5 pounds to a curl in a year is a huge accomplishment because that's a lot after 9 years. So it's like, can you redefine? Because most people just think of progressive overload as adding weight to the bar, but then it's like, can you redefine in your head what does progressive overload look like? So then it gets to um, now there may have been some. I'm going to add a rep or two here, but that starts to take on more paramount importance. Is can I add a rep or two? Um, then you start to tinker with volume levels and intensity levels, right? Am I taking more sets to failure? Can I handle another set or two here or there? And this doesn't, sometimes I think guys go too far with that. So some guys can't make that transition, right? They get frustrated by the slower progress. The only way they measure their success in the gym is um, adding weight to the bar. So if they can't make that shift, then I don't think that they're going to continue to progress beyond this point. The guys that make that shift are like, can I add another set, even one more set, one more intense set can do that. It can push you there. Can I add another set? Can I add a rep or two here? Some intensity techniques, right? Maybe do some rest pause, drop sets. Also, even tinkering with rep ranges. I've been maybe narrow focused in my rep ranges, only sticking with 8 to 12. Can I go a little heavier? Can I go, with the higher reps and push my limits in those regards? I think you can maybe work on that for another 4 years, 5 years. Then, actually, what I see is um, the transition to realizing that certain muscle groups have not really been pulling their weight. And what I mean by that is I always say there's a progression. I'm gonna summarize this with the progression of the lifters with dumbbell lateral raises. Um, in the early part, you walk into the gym, you maybe use 15-pound dumbbells for your dumbbell lateral raises the first time you go in there. Maybe the really big guys going up to 25 the first time they head into the gym. And you add weight, add weight, add weight, and it's like over the course of 7 years, you're like up to 45-pound dumbbells, 50-pound dumbbells. And the form is not great, but it's not bad. Nobody would look at it and say it's horrible form. And then maybe around year 14, you're like, I think I need to go back down to the 25s. You know what I mean? Because you've actually learned how to purely lift with with your side delts, with your, being able, I'm not sure why I have balloons popping up behind me. But being able to purely lift with just your medial delts. Whereas, when you're using those heavier weights, you get a lot of trap involvement, front delts get into the mix, a lot of momentum. But most competitors that I know that have been training 15 years that have really progressed far in the sport, they get really good sets with 25-pound dumbbells, like really good sets, good form, intense. And so I think that then you start to get into, I'm going to use a perfect example. Like a significant part of my training career, I've struggled to build my chest because my triceps always want to get into the mix. And,
Same here.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so, the advanced trainees start to look at, okay, like really break down, like, why does this happen? And can you figure out why it's happening? Because it's not always the same reason for everyone else. Sometimes it's poor form, sometimes it's poor load choice, like choosing weights that are too heavy, poor exercise choice, um, needing to kind of recalibrate these pattern movements you've gotten into. If I can give one anecdotal thing for myself, I'm pretty sure my chest issues come from, I played basketball from grade school into high school into college, and everything in basketball is a tricep, is an elbow extension, right? Shooting, dribbling, shooting and dribbling. And I played a position where I did a lot of shooting and dribbling. And so while I didn't have any load, this is pure pattern development, hundreds of thousands of reps of elbow extension. And so when I got into the gym and I did an elbow extension, on a cable push down or an overhead extension, my body was like, I know this movement, right? So my triceps blew up. I had great neural coordination there. Those motor units just fire. So then when I get on a bench press and I try to use my chest, my body's like, oh, I know this movement, elbow extension. You know what I mean? And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, this is not what we're trying to do here. So it's a lot of years of trying to untrain everything to be an elbow extension movement. And so, I think whether or not somebody can continue to progress is real, like be able to like find the holes in their training and then plug them in that manner, and allow that to happen. Because if I'm still, I'll use myself as an example. So my chest woes, being able to develop my chest, everything being an elbow extension, if I never can break out of that early part of my training career where the only thing that matters is adding 5 pounds to the bar, then I'm still going to be into the gym trying to add 5 pounds to the bench press. My triceps are going to probably keep getting bigger and my chest is not. And so it's like, it's not going to lead to me being a better athlete. So I got to be able to like adjust and titrate and be able to like measure myself and adjust. So I think that that's one of the things. And then the other thing, the final thing, but this kind of underpins everything, is can you still enjoy training after so many years? Um, because I see a lot of guys, and people have said this to me, and this is a real discussion with some athletes. After you've been training for 15 years, some guys have just said to me flat out, I don't know if I have that fire to go in there and take this many sets to failure or do this at that level anymore. And I think that's a realistic discussion people need to have with themselves is, can you get in there and just go crazy with it? You know what I mean? Like go in there and push yourself and have fun doing that. And that is like, that kind of underlies everything, honestly, if you can still be able to go in there and push it to the max.
Wow, those are some amazing takeaways, Cliff. There's so much I could have added there. I won't. I'm just going to mention that the principle of neuromechanical matching, something that Chris Beardsley talks about a lot, is that just what you said, the brain will send signals to the muscle it determines to be the best at performing a movement in compound movement. So that's exactly what you said there. And an anecdote on my end is I also had that weak chest going, and every pressing movement I would just blow up my triceps, and they just used to call me Mr. Arms in the old powerlifting gym back in my powerlifting days. Flat chest, huge arms. But doing more isolation stuff, converting chest presses, getting out of the big three mindset, that was definitely the game changer for me. Also, you spoke about doing other rep ranges, and again, the trend these days tends to be that, well, there's like this sweet spot of reps. Some are in 4 to 8, 5 to 8, 5 to 10, 8 to 12, depends on who you ask. But I've had the feeling all the way back since 2005, and I developed my reps and been training that for so many years myself and with my clients, that there's something special going on with high reps and the more metabolic type training, shorter rest stuff, that perhaps isn't apparent in most lifters until I get to the very advanced stage. So that tends to be like, sometimes it's what's needed to begin moving progress in the right direction. Just adding in some higher rep stuff, some type of metabolic perturbance, if you like. And so that's obviously great to get my confirmation bias going there with you saying the exact same thing.
No, you're absolutely right, and it's so, and I completely agree with you when you say, like, sometimes it's not apparent until the more advanced stages. And it's also why probably in the last 4 years I've started prescribing even high. Like, it's not uncommon for me to prescribe 30 reps, because also the research does show that the heavier the load, the less control we have over what muscle groups do the lifting. Because as you said, the brain will pattern itself to where we're going to lift this in the way that we feel is the most efficient possible. And so, and I think a lot of us have felt this. If you try to do a 1 rep max, you don't have the luxury of being like, okay, I'm going to let my pecs take the tension here. It's like you're just pushing. And so, the way I also see is like weaker muscle groups, I like to give more high rep sets to kind of like make up for that pattern development. So, for example, if I do a set of 30 to failure or near failure on a pressing movement, I can really decide to use my pecs. And then I'm also kind of like redeveloping this pattern movement, because now, after, if I do let's say 3 sets of 30 for my pecs, um, I've now done 90 reps where I'm starting to fortify that, that signaling that a press is a chest movement. It's press movement, 90 reps. So it may seem small, but over the course of 2 years, 3 years, eventually I've found, I also have the luxury of working with athletes for a long time. I have a lot of athletes that I've worked with for 6, 7, 8, 10 years. And one thing I've found is that, when we do these high reps, their heavy work, their heavy load work seems to become more effective over time. They can then actually feel, for me, it's my pecs, but for other people, it may be their back or whatever it may be. They can actually start to feel that target muscle group work on their heavier loads. So I think it pays downstream effects in terms of that pattern development, that neural pattern development. So it's, but like you said, you don't see that in somebody that's only been training 2 years. It's like this is a real long process, and you're right. I also think that, a lot of people really miss out. I mean, training heavy is really cool. Um, one phrase I started telling my competitors is like, you're a true bodybuilder when you can bring the same intensity to a set of 20 reps on your dumbbell laterals that you can to a 1 rep deadlift max out. I mean, like,
Yeah.
if you can bring that same intensity, you are ready to bring your ultimate physique, because, being able to like bring intensity to these high rep, lightweight, all out sets, it's difficult, but the best competitors can do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's really well said, and I guess kind of segues into the next point about you mentioned your nutritional approach that was perhaps more carb heavy, lower fats to allow carbs to stay high. And also from my personal experience, you also tend to set protein slightly higher than the current evidence-based recommendations. But do you also see that like the best bodybuilders that tend to do best respond better to higher carbs? Like what do you use to determine who will respond to the typical bodybuilding prep diet that you prescribe according to your, let's say, your book, and who tends to respond better to lower carbs and higher fats and whatever?
Gotcha. Yeah. You know, I kind of do the same thing with diet that we've been talking about with training, and I try to, you know, set it for the individual first. I try to like let go of any preconceived notions of what maybe I want and try to focus on what this individual may need. So the first thing I kind of look at is what have they been doing? Because sometimes people tend to gravitate towards what feels best for them naturally. Um, and so I can gain some insight from that. Um, but one thing that is a fairly significant factor tends to be, and is like such a controversial topic these days, but it's like I do believe that skin color and race tend to have a significant bearing on what type of diet would be appropriate: high carb, low carb, high fat, low fat, higher protein, lower protein. I mean, it makes logical sense because if somebody's ancestors' environment was strong enough to change their skin pigment, of course it would be strong enough to have some dictation over their dietary needs. I definitely believe that that's like a decent place to begin. Like I've found that generally speaking, lighter skin individuals tend to do a little bit better with a higher carb, lower fat approach. Darker skin tend to go a little bit better with a lower carb, higher fat approach. Protein, I found can be a little bit all over the map. I do tend to prescribe higher protein um, than what the current research is showing. Um, but sometimes when people seem to be able to build muscle relatively easy, I will actually even go on the lower end of that. So I kind of just point I kind of go where their body's pointing me, and I'm not really afraid. I try not to be afraid of just going there and letting myself wander in that direction. And then once again, it's a back and forth between me and the client, and seeing like, hey, do you feel good on this? Do you not feel good on that? How are you managing this? How are you managing that? And I kind of just make notes along the way of this seems to be doing well for them, and let's do more of that. And this isn't doing well, let's do less of that. And it's just this process of going back and forth in that manner. But the diets that people I have following can be wildly different. Um, so sometimes I'll have people, you know, sometimes people will be shocked that I have clients getting ready for stage and they're doing no cardio and eating 250 grams of carbs a day. And then I have other clients that are doing, quite a bit of cardio and eating 60 grams of carbs a day. So I just really go where the body takes me.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting. Also, that so to me, of course, you would assume that the darker skin would live around the equatorial regions where they had access to more carbs, and vice versa. The Nordic countries would, have less carbs, especially during wintertime. But it also tends to make sense because if you're a darker skinned person and you live way off from the equator, then your carb tolerance isn't going to be as good as if you were actually living in Africa still. So I actually, that sounds very logical when you think about
Yeah.
it.
Well, and then there's some other things that are a little bit so actually when I first got into coaching is I noticed that all of the all of the white coaches had really good looking white clients. and all of the good black coaches had really good looking black clients. And it was like there was, and I tried to make, I kind of took note of that. I wanted to be able to prep anybody. And luckily I've had some clients that we can just speak frankly with each other. If you look at the demographics of my clients, I coach men, I coach women, I have all ethnicities. I've coached people off the top of my head. I want to say I've coached people in about 35 different countries now. And so, I have some clients that they really just let me speak honestly because I think they know that my intent is to help. And, one thing I've even done with a few of my clients that we found is pretty interesting. So I'll use myself. We're always, as coaches, biased by our own experiences as an individual. So I'll use myself as an example. I have a high metabolic rate. I can tolerate a lot of food, and I always have. And so sometimes trying to assign low food intakes to a male that I can't even perceive of operating well on this low caloric intake, it makes me uncomfortable because it's my own individual bias as a coach. But you know, I think, and this is maybe where I disagree with some of the research in terms of the individuality of metabolic rates. But I think the thing is, sometimes I'll coach people where they are recently removed from their ancestors, are recently removed from a low food famine prone area. They do not tolerate much food, and they operate on low food intakes. Like I have one female client that comes to mind, and as a coach, a competitor, I tend to get a little antsy when female clients start to get around 1,000 calories. I'm like, this is low. And I will take her down there, and she's like, I set a new PR today.
Wow.
And and she's like, I don't feel that bad. So I kind of also kind of rely on, like, talk to me. You have to let me know, if you're struggling.
Yeah.
If you are struggling, you got to talk to me about it. So I kind of let them, tell me when it starts to be too much. And that helps me let go of my bias of where they should be calorically or with this or that. Hey, tell me how you're feeling and we'll go from there.
That's amazing. But do you also see that this tends to change over time, or is it like, well, you have a low metabolism and you always will?
It can change over time for sure. Um, I find that it just depends on what they've been doing. I would say there's a certain level of, I don't want to say abuse. Um, it's like people that have constantly been forcing themselves to do one thing. People that have constantly been yo-yo dieting, things like that. When people have that history, um, then I think there can be some improvement.
Mm.
This like yo-yo dieting nature. But if somebody has been largely, I would say, responsibly undereating for a long period of time,
Mm.
usually if you can, well, I say undereat, but I don't mean undereating, but I would say somebody's been consuming low calories for a long period of time. It's hard to consume low calories for a lengthy period of time if it's
Yeah.
not meant for your body. You know what I mean? So it's like, if people aren't meant for that, then they're going to yo-yo diet because they're going to break. But if somebody's just been eating low calories for a long period of time, then that hints to me that they're probably just meant to have low calories.
Yeah, yeah. Mm. Makes a lot of sense. And also, I mean, like for myself, at the low point, we're at 1,900 calories, and that's not a lot for, like, I'm 93 kilos, 207 pounds.
Hmm.
But reflecting on my history, I would always go on like 6 to 9 months of dieting and then rebound back and eat way too much when I was trying to add muscle mass. So I would just blow up, add too much fat, and probably spend maybe 2 months in a surplus and then have to go back on a diet. So I guess
Yeah.
that's my reward on this particular diet. That's it's a consequence of my history.
Yeah, and that's pretty I would say that's a pretty common thing when people are like trying to force themselves into a diet that's like too extreme for themselves. And it's like I think we've all most of us have experienced trying to do that. You know, it's like you try to diet too quickly or eat too low calorie and then you kind of rebound from it too quickly. And so it's like but if somebody's consistently eating low intake and they kind of act like, oh, it's no big deal, then I'm like, well, that's probably where they feel decently comfortable. There we go.
So do you then tend to do you have any of these clients like gradually scale up their calories over time? I mean, do you try to fix low metabolism, or do you just work with it?
I I always test the limits, you know, because I never really know until I get my hands in there. And so one thing I will do is I'll build food up, but there are certain points where I'm like, wow, this person is gaining a lot of weight on a low caloric intake. Um, you know, so then I'm like, but then I think so then there's always that you gotta try to diagnose a little bit because then you look, is there a tracking issue? Are they telling you the truth about what they're eating? Um, do they, these are the two biggest factors. Are they tracking correctly, and are they telling you the truth? Are two significant factors. Um, but over the course of time, you start to find out, right? If you find out what they're eating and the tracking is easy, finding out if they're telling you the truth is not so easy, um, because there's a lot of reasons a client wouldn't tell you the truth. Sometimes I think coaches hear that and they think like my client's lying to me, and it's like, well, keep in mind they're probably doing things that they're not proud of as well. So it's like you kind of got to make this a safe spot for them to be able to tell you that they are not, they haven't been following the plan exactly. But once I decipher those two things, sometimes I'll push the limits, and I kind of reset the range that I'm working with. For myself, it's like my operating room, I usually don't have to go below 2,000 calories to get contest lean. I slowly bring it down there. Um, I usually can't go above, well, I'm almost 40 now. I can't really go above like 4,000 anymore without gaining too quickly. But it's like that's kind of my operating space. I work in there. And so it's like sometimes I try to not assign my operating space to other people. And so there have been males that I've worked with, their operating space is 1,600 to 2,500 or 2,800, And so I'm like, I kind of, not that I won't test those limits and continually test those limits, but I kind of need to tell myself this is their operating space and that's okay. Like I don't need to try to force this wider range on them or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so being respectful of your time, I guess we're just gonna start to tie up some loose ends here. So my next question is just basically, where do you see yourself going? I mean, are you going to keep being a bodybuilding coach? I know you had some health issues this last year or two, and so where do you see yourself in the next year or five?
Yeah, that's a good question. I did have some health issues. Luckily, I seem to be on the back end of that. I'm kind of getting back into much more aggressive full training. Um, I'm kind of probably not going to stop trying to compete. I'm still a ways off from being there, but I would always like to get back on stage, and we'll see if I can get there one day. I definitely want to continue bodybuilding coaching. Um, I'm going to continue bodybuilding coaching. That's just too much in my blood. I have branched out into a few side things, as you and I have discussed. I wrote the book a few years ago. I have a new one on the way, and I'm starting a new one here. I enjoy writing. It's a different type of challenge, and I have some writing ideas that I think are a little unique to the industry. So I've been focusing on that. I've also I do also work with a few Gen Pop people that are, I would say, not, there's, I would say, special population Gen Pop people. Um, like I coach a few like CEOs of businesses, like guys that are like really interested in pushing limits of things, of a few tech companies. And then I also coach a stunt man who's done like the stunt work on the Fast and Furious movies and stuff like that, because it's a unique challenge. Like he'll he'll tell me in a month. This is a literally thing. He goes, in a month, I have to be able to hang from a helicopter for 4 minutes and then pull myself up at the end of it.
Oh
Um,
wow.
so for me as a coach, it's a unique challenge to program. How do we get this guy to hang from a helicopter? And he's not a small guy. So he's about 230 pounds. So hanging from a helicopter for 4 minutes is not an easy feat, right? And then pull yourself up. Um, so it's a unique challenge. So I would say usually I don't tend to be this long-term plan type of guy. I tend to chase, I find that I keep my passion for the sport by chasing what is interesting to me. And coaching is always going to be there for sure, bodybuilding coaching. And writing is interesting. And then whatever opportunities come my way, I continue to focus on them. And I did actually take on a few coaches under me for the first time about 6 months ago. Um, I have 4 coaches under me, and each one of them kind of has their own specialty, from Gen Pop to coaching competitors and coaching other athletes. Because I can't always take on everybody that wants to work with me. Maybe at the moment I'm full, or my prices are a little out of the range. So I have these coaches that I get to teach and I've taught, and then I kind of get to place people with them. And so that's been fun too. I kind of continue to just do things that I find fun and interesting and challenging, and then it usually doesn't steer me wrong.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and completely resonate with that. I mean, I'm just a big fan of pursuing my passions, my interest, and sharing that with the world. I kind of got led astray with some marketing gurus that told me that everything I did was wrong, so I had to, be better, and and I lost followers. So I completely resonate with that. Just do what aligns with your own values, your own interests. What makes life fun and your career fun, and yeah, and also bringing on more coaches that can take off some of the loads of your back. Because I assume you're quite popular.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, having some of these and having coaches that I trust is like
Yeah.
important. A couple of them have been clients that have been with me 10 years. So I've been able to work with them for a long time. One is actually my ex-wife who helped me start my own coaching business. And so,
Oh, cool.
I have people that I trust, that I know are great coaches, and that way we can kind of all go at it together and help people, which is what we're still trying to do at the end of the day, right? So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I took a break from coaching for close to a year, and then started taking on clients again. And I mean, it's because I also want to just work with people, and a lot of Gen Pop, obviously, a lot of CEOs and that type of ambitious and driven individuals are actually very interesting to work with, like you said.
yeah,
So yeah,
absolutely.
I think we're very much alike. I used to train a lot more bodybuilding fitness competitors a few years ago, but kind of segued into more of a Gen Pop and special populations, I guess. But that's for sure always been a passion of mine. And again, with your help, then we'll see. Maybe I'll compete in my 50s. That will be sure be fun. I'm
I would like to see that happen.
Yeah, and I mean it's just been an amazing journey, and highly recommend you as a coach. Obviously, just your style of communicating and working, and it's certainly been challenging to me, both on a physical and mental level. But I'm really glad I signed up, and glad to have you in my corner, as I probably keep saying every week. But I mean it from the bottom of my heart.
Oh, I really
So
appreciate it.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um. So yeah. Where can people find you and contact you if they want to work with you? And see your stuff, basically?
Yeah, the best places are my website, which is teamwilsonbb.com, or my Instagram. It's at CW Team Wilson. Those are the two best places to find me. There's multiple ways you can reach out to me through either my website or Instagram, and I make sure I'll get back to everyone. So yeah, that's the best
Yeah.
place.
I'll put the links in the show notes as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Cliff. Thank you for coming on. It's been an honor, and I wish you the best. And I also look forward to keep working with you.
Thanks.